Hello, and thank you for your continued interest in the different podcasts on the Evolutionary Service Group. Today we'll be talking about workers in the field of religion, and this is part 1 of 2 for that podcast. Millennia ago, the world's main religions were founded by great teachers who appeared for a particular race or region in the world. Among the greatest teachers were the Christ and the Buddha and thousands of other mystics, sages of all faiths. In retrospect, their teachings have inspired all that is great in the human spirit through literature, the arts, science, philosophies, and untold influence in all levels of human activity. On the other side, due to arrogance, narrow-mindedness, selfishness, and mistruths, religions have caused great wars, infighting in communities, and certainly represent division and separation. This is the opposite of what their originating founders had envisioned. Although there are separations between religions, many workers within these religious groups today choose to emphasize unity and the fellowship of spirit, working out in their local communities and in the world. Ideally, theirs is a work embracing loving synthesis and how culture and society chooses to support and express the life and spirit within. Eventually, their work will provide a universal platform for the foundation of the New World religion under the inspiration of the Christ. And when I speak of the Christ, I'm not talking about the Christian version of the Christ. We're talking about a higher being that oversees all civilization, that is the head of the hierarchy, and that oversees the unfoldment of religion. The references made to the Christ are not limited to Christian understanding, but understanding or acknowledging the universal qualities of the Christ, such as selfless love, evoking the spirit of understanding, goodwill, and the urge toward better human relationships. People of the major religions make up well over 80% of the world's population. That constitutes a major influence that they carry with them everywhere they go, such as in politics, culture, and social structure. In this podcast, besides the workers in the field of religion, we are also acknowledging the beliefs of native or indigenous peoples around the world. Maybe the problem with the believers on this planet is that they expect someone else to come and solve their problems instead of doing it themselves. Religious leaders of the world, major faiths, are seeking to find common ground and align with universal spiritual values through education, dialogue, and service. Their work represents a great cohesion within the community and contributes toward building bridges of understanding and fostering mutual respect now and into the future. Members of this group are bringing together the energies of love and wisdom in their expression as they express the following ways: through ecumenical groups, through interfaith, such as between Christianity, Buddhism, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, and many other groups. Interspiritual, by emphasizing commonalities that they all share, and a demonstration of the fact of the Spirit of God existing both transcendent and immanent. On a more advanced level of consciousness, these workers will operate through a mode of transcendental occultism, and this will determine or demonstrate the divine quality of forces in nature and humanity, and the correct methods for using these forces by humanity for divine purpose. These workers could work with the scientific servers and other seed groups or service groups to understand the basics of how energy and force interact in our world through people and the environment. Another group of workers will demonstrate that humanity as a whole is a complete expression of divinity. When the divine nature is known both individually and at the group level, the approach between humanity and the planetary hierarchy will be made easier. We'll talk about now embodying spiritual values. Those who embody and express the light of the soul can be known as messengers of light. Today they are known in all nations and cultures as world servers or service workers. Through their expression of the soul's light, they radiate the highest essence of what spiritually centered life offers. Billions of people already see and acknowledge the Christ and the Buddha as primary models for exhibiting the highest spiritual values that individuals and groups can become. It can be said the hard work of establishing the pathways in human consciousness on the inner planes was established long ago by the masters, the great mystics, the Buddha, and the Christ. And this has made the path easier for achieving liberation for all followers. The great ones, or the masters, became their true and enlightened selves because they pushed through limitations in their own consciousness, which resulted in greater vision as to what the path is and who we really are as human beings. Because of their spiritual achievements, their legacy remains with us through their teachings, their exemplary life, and their life stories. When we study their lives and teachings, we see how they transcended the limitations of the lower planes and freed themselves to become models for human behavior par excellence. Regarding ethics and spiritual values, these are thoughts and actions by an individual or group as the best way to live and conduct oneself morally in life. As esotericists, we see values as subtle energies that influence an individual's behavior. From a secular or worldly level, values act as a moral or ethical code that are adopted and applied to people and social situations. Servers employing the highest spiritual values will typically be motivated by cooperation, goodwill, compassion, tolerance, inclusion, sense of personal responsibility, sense of social justice, dispassion, harmlessness, selflessness, impersonality, sharing, and giving. Service workers never impose or force their will or values on anybody or groups. Since higher spiritual values are a natural expression of who they are as living souls, people understand this idea by their example, and by the extension, their radiation acts as a livingness of the soul energy coming through them. With the coming externalization of the hierarchies, or the masters coming back to return to earth in physical form, they will establish the new esoteric schools. These schools and teachings will help to train disciples in living of ethical life while embodying spiritual values. They in turn will train the thinkers of the race who will develop the new culture. For everyday humanity, the youth will be trained in thought form building. This is not about imposed ideas, but that they would be taught to have an understanding about who they are as human beings and souls, and live and learn to teach each other in kind. They would learn how to use their mind efficiently, selflessly, and harmlessly to build the new civilization. This will enable them to be exposed to higher spiritual values so that they will become a natural and healthy part of our educational, political, and social discourse. Looking at this from a broad perspective, this furthers the progress of civilization and ultimately eliminates crime and violence and corruption so rampant in the world today. It is what we as service workers should always be practicing and aspiring to become, as we ourselves are examples to others through the teaching we embrace and become. It is the service workers who must practice the will to good and, by their example, ultimately influence and enable others and the masses to learn to practice it too. So I'm going to mention now the concept of universality. Universality encompasses key concepts that underline the interconnectedness of all spiritual paths and the unity of humanity. And some of these include the ageless wisdom. Ageless wisdom teachings emphasize the existence of a timeless and universal wisdom that underlies all the world's spiritual traditions. This wisdom is believed to contain fundamental truths about the nature of reality, human existence, and the spiritual path. Another concept is synthesis. Universality in Alice Bailey's teachings promotes the idea of synthesizing diverse spiritual teachings and practices from different traditions. It encourages individuals to seek common ground among various spiritual perspectives and to integrate them into a cohesive understanding of spirituality. There's the concept of unity of humanity. Universality emphasizes the essential unity of humanity regardless of cultural, religious, or ideological differences. It suggests that all human beings are interconnected and share a common spiritual heritage. We can talk about spiritual evolution. Universality suggests that all beings are on a journey of spiritual evolution, moving toward greater awareness, understanding, and unity with the divine, that all individuals undergo as they progress on their spiritual journey. Universality suggests that this evolutionary process is universal and applies to all human beings regardless of their background and beliefs. We can talk about cosmic purpose. Universality infers a greater purpose underlying all creation, and that we are all part of a larger scheme of evolution. Understanding and aligning to this idea and purpose is central to human spiritual development. We'll talk about esotericism. Esoteric knowledge and teachings play a significant role in Alice Bailey's work, and universality encompasses the idea that the esoteric truths are accessible to all individuals who sincerely seek them, regardless of their culture or religious affiliation. And finally, universality can embrace the concept of service. It emphasizes the importance of selfless service to humanity as a central aspect of spiritual growth and development. It suggests that serving others is a universal spiritual principle that transcends individual differences. Overall, universality encompasses the idea that spiritual truths are universal and applicable to all individuals, regardless of their cultural, religious, or ideological backgrounds. It emphasizes the interconnectedness of all spiritual paths and the unity of humanity in the quest for higher consciousness and spiritual evolution. We'll turn now to the nature of devotion and idealism. The age of Pisces, and this is a concept in esoteric astrology, was a time of separation. This has been with humanity for over 2,000 years, and it will be with us still for a number of hundreds of years into the future. And it has the potential of transforming the lower expression of separation, like my religion versus your religion, or my beliefs versus your beliefs, instead of together we have common beliefs, to stimulating spiritual aspiration in humanity and bringing a vision of divinity. The radiation of this energy has influenced human awareness as a yearning for connecting with our higher spiritual nature and embracing the greater light within. Souls who are moved by this energy are inclined towards the energies of devotion and idealism and recognize that these can move mankind into higher spiritual realization. For them, the path of enlightenment, or to enlightenment, is also a path of devotion and idealism and in the letting go of human desire, or desire for material objects and greed and selfishness, such as. So talking about devotion, it is about a fixed attention, an affection, or an admiration that is focused on an individual or an ideal. That's more of a definition. From a viewpoint of spiritual evolution, the question at hand is whether the individual's consciousness is lost emotionally in illusion and not employing or knowing what is contacted. In the Ageless Wisdom teachings, a mystic, for example, is an individual who is at the early stage of evolutionary development. He or she senses divine qualities through aspiration and devotion on an emotional level. His or her life is characterized by sincere devotion through prayer and worship. The mystic is able to sense the higher truths through the intuition or in meditation, but not necessarily know or understand how to return or reconnect with that higher energy. The path of the mystic is different from that of the esotericist, who is consciously aware of the world of energies and the forces that make up the subjective reality. Path of the mystic precedes the path of esotericism and can lead the aspirant to achieving what we call the first initiation, or ensconcing the Christ principle of love and cooperation and goodwill in his heart and mind. Nearing the end of the path of the mystic, he will begin to yearn for knowledge about the forces and energies that influence him. He will be drawn onto what's called the probationary path, and after a measure of purification, he will take the first initiation. This is where the majority of humanity is now in evolution. That is, like on the probationary path and aspiring towards devotion and idealism and moving toward the concept of aspiration for taking the first initiation. So let's talk now about universal idealism. Since the age of Pisces, astrologically speaking again, influencing humanity over 2,000 years ago, a hallmark of that time, or this time still happening, was developing idealism in consciousness. Idealism is the sensing or intuiting of an impression. That's like feeling the what does this feel like? Do I get any symbols or imagery in my head? This is what an impression is. That becomes concretized into an ideal or a thought form. Often the individual is veiled or blocked by an overly emotional focus, and this prevents him from the full experience and implementation of the higher sensed ideal. He or she can overcome this emotional limitation by focusing on unity, brotherhood, and group awareness, or perhaps working out of how service can be rendered better in the community. Eventually, through inspiration from the soul, the personality, through multiple incarnations, faintly senses the pull of the soul to evolve. And this inspiration becomes a sensed aspiration that allows the aspirant, or the devotee, to eventually evolve into an individual to ultimately connect with the higher monad, the higher pure spirit. So examples of idealism could be the political idealist from history would be like Woodrow Wilson from World War I. His sense of political idealism was to put forward a set of ideals, principles, and values and goals into the League of Nations. Historically, the League was not necessarily based on concrete realities or agreed upon norms. His idealism represented the world as he would like to see it, instead of the present state in which the world was in 1919. Similarly, in the arts, idealism affirms imagination and attempts to realize mental concept of beauty, a standard perfection as compared with the aesthetic of naturalism and realism. In Alice Bailey's book, Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 2, Master D.K. comments that a major step towards helping humanity to focus on the energies of devotion and idealism will be with the reappearance of the Great Lord, who will act as a lens through which the light can be focused and adapted to human need. Later in this talk, I will be talking about the reappearance of the Christ. This vision is mostly notably flowing through those world servers who are working towards and part of the religious service group. Google provides a definition on how idealism and the mind can work together. They say that objects do not exist entirely apart from the mind because the mind shapes them. It is not the world that shapes the mind, but the mind that gives reason to the world, so that the mind alone is the source of all reason, having an inner light and innate moral goodness and understanding of what is good. And this speaks to the notion that all thought and feeling happens within the mind. For the esotericist, he will know the mind as the place where he sees thought and feeling as energy and force to be directed by his motivation towards service. Now let's turn now to the concept of narrow idealism. Narrow idealism arises when a limited version of a higher spiritual concept is limited or distorted towards selfish ends. The narrow focus blocks higher ideals, and impressions from the soul or the masters, such as deception and illusion, are the result. For example, a chief tenet of the Christian, Jewish, and Islamic faiths is the patriarchal notion that men should dominate and control all religious teaching, and that women should be in subservient roles. Although this mindset has dominated for millennia, there is considerable evidence that the power that these religions hold is loosening and becoming more tolerant and accepting women as equals in religious teaching. This can be especially seen in both Christianity and Judaism, where women are becoming priests and rabbis. The same is true in Islam and in Catholicism, where a growing number of female imam Muslims and Catholic women priests are challenging traditional narratives. Talk about religious fanaticism. Looking back in world history in the past hundreds of years, the subject of religious fanaticism and separative inclinations is playing out through extreme idealism and fanaticism. These are all being expressed on the world stage through various political, social, and religious groups. In an esoteric context, this is the expression of deception and controlling man's mind with thoughts of hatred, separatism, through emotional and mental control. The Tibetan master D.K. warned us that a religious war is the war we must not have. But since World War II, there are numerous indications that this has indeed been happening, with a very strong vibration of fundamentalism and religious fervor in the world. These are individuals with strong proclivities toward extreme idealism and fanaticism. And this represents, of course, an illusion with the emotional and energy of devotion. For example, in Christianity, many individuals and religious groups are driving politics in the United States with religious views that abortion is against God's law, or that we must fight or go to war against Islamic extremists. For Islam, religious fanatics continue to drive the Syrian civil war and conflicts with Israel, pitting sects of Islam against each other or Israel. The Chinese government wages a policy of forced sterilization and labor of the Islamic minority Uyghurs. Feelings of anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim behavior around the world are inflamed for largely political purposes. In the last 50-plus years, we've seen a considerable uptick in religious fervor erupt from radical elements of Islamic faith who have been involved in wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Yemen. The deception of religious fanaticism gives a leader of a community or nation the right to act from a moral authority based on his good or versus evil interpretation as justification for going to war or attacking other people and causes. Note that going to war is not just an activity on the physical sense, but it happens first on the subjective planes as a thought. To the people that perpetrate the war, the world is black and white, and they tend to divide the world into separate camps, one pitted against the other, and the need to tame that entity which is not in step with his idea of morality, therefore provides a text or a pretext for war. This, then, is taking a thought and manipulating it for selfish ends. In many communities around the world, religious and political leaders stand united in condemning acts of extremism, such as the violence and hatred against minority groups, such as Jews and Muslims. In Alice Bailey's book, Esoteric Psychology, Volume 1, DK states, for example, Christianity is primarily a religion demonstrating to man that his duality and so laying the foundation for future unity. Through the lens of an illumined mind, man will see all aspects of divinity hitherto unknown. While this passage specifically refers to Christianity, it could also apply to all the major religions in their quest for bringing forth unity and brotherhood. We will turn now to religion and the mysteries. The so-called mysteries refer to the mystery schools which existed in ancient Egypt, Greece, Persia, Great Britain, and with the Essenes in Palestine. These were religious and philosophic places of learning to protect and teach knowledge of natural and spiritual laws. The primary teachers of that time understood that although this knowledge could be beneficial to individuals, it was deemed too powerful and potentially harmful to mankind. Practically, up to the publication of the Secret Doctrine in the 1888, the knowledge of the mysteries was kept secret and out of world culture. Here in the age of information, much of the ancient secret spiritual teachings is now largely available and globally to the public. Key teachings common to the mystery schools and the major religions to the ageless wisdom: there is one God immanent, everywhere at the same time, and omniscient or all-knowing. Worship was done through rituals, dancing, chanting, and music, often around annual festivals of summer and winter, and such as the celebration of the solstice. The greater mysteries emphasize methods of advanced techniques, attaining spiritual development, knowledge of spiritual laws, and how to apply them. So what we can say on this is man has a soul and has expressed it through his mind, his mental nature, his feelings, his emotional nature, and sensations, his physical nature. Each of these are subject to natural and spiritual laws. Emphasis on connecting with the soul and learning to overcome and control desire while living a moral life. And also the mysteries talked about through the aid of special practices and techniques and meditation, man is helped to advance on the spiritual path. The ageless wisdom is the knowledge and wisdom that ties together the teachings of the mystics, the world's religions, and the mystery schools. Through each of them runs a thread of common teachings or truths on spirituality, although many of the truths over time have become obscured, misunderstood, and misinterpreted. Ancient wisdom present in the major religions. In the Eastern religions, such as Hinduism and Buddhism, both religions emphasize the concept of oneness. God is everything and everywhere. And there are doctrines of reincarnation, karma, spiritual development and purification of the body, the mind, and scientific practice of meditation. For Judaism and Islam, emphasis on emphasizing the one God and not the lesser gods. That is, there's no idols should be worshipped. And this involves observing and applying God's laws as a way of life. And both of these major religions teach that contacting the heavenly hosts, this is an acknowledgement of the spiritual hierarchy or the masters and the guides. For Christianity specifically, the doctrines or the teachings on reincarnation and the hierarchy are part of Christianity. That is, the book of Revelation, for example. Emphasis that God is love and that man's soul has a potential to express God-like qualities. Each religion reflects similar emphasis on emotional or intellectual development. Seen in daily conversations, worship services, teachings, and materials and other group meetings. Through the emotions, a devotional path of salvation is possible. Through the intellectual acquisition of knowledge, this will lead to a union with God. Through knowledge of the three major religions, the major spiritual paths have been defined, such as the path of devotion, the path of knowledge, and the path of service. So I'm going to finalize this section of the podcast with talking about a concept which is understood in major theosophical teachings, particularly with the Alice Bailey teachings, and it's known as the reappearance of the Christ and the externalization of the hierarchy. So the reappearance of the Christ is the central motivating theme for what's called the New Group World Servers, or those people who have been serving in a capacity for bringing forth God's plan, the knowledge of the teachings, the mystery schools, and the Eastern teachings to the world, and helping bring the concept of right human relations around the world. For generations, all the major religions have been expecting the New World Teacher. This great being is known by the Christians as the Christ. The Jews await for the Messiah. The Hindus, it's for Krishna. For the Buddhists, they are expecting the Maitreya Buddha. The Muslims are awaiting the Imam Mahdi. Although there are different names, it is believed that they all refer to the same individual, the world teacher. This great being would not come as a religious leader or savior, but as a guide for the evolution of all humanity. And he would guide us in helping to solve our own problems by providing a universal, higher vision and wisdom. It is humanity that would make this vision and carry it out through its own will. The world teacher would provide significant help in this process. In theosophical teachings, Lord Maitreya is an advanced and high-ranking member of the spiritual hierarchy. This great being oversees the evolution of humanity and represents a continual cycle of knowledge transfer about the nature of man's constitution and about how he would properly exist in the world. With his appearance in the physical world and taking a body, he fulfills the role of a world teacher. And this is especially understood with the concept of the ending of one great age, known as the age esoterically or astrologically as the age of Pisces, and that the age of Aquarius is coming forth, and so that a great teacher would come forth to bring forth a new teaching and understanding about how evolution proceeds. The Tibetan master D.K. said the Christ will be the harbinger of the age of Aquarius and will stand before humanity as the great exemplar of what a human being and the larger group called humanity can become. The ageless wisdom teachings tell us that the Christ never left the earth plane, but has been with us to return from time to time when the time is ripe and according to his choosing. Individuals of the esoteric teachings accept the fact of his return and that it is a recognition of the continuity of revelation, and that with the coming of the new age, the great teacher appears. As individuals who act as the hands and the feet of the hierarchy, they have been preparing humanity for the coming new age for this great event. This great being will reappear along with the hierarchy of masters who are also set to externalize and to help prepare humanity for a transition from a time of selfishness, fear, and separation to an era of cooperation and goodwill and brotherhood. The reappearance entails an overshadowing of his individuals and those who are in any way spiritually awakened. His work will be primarily on the emotional plane, where he will form active groups which began early in the 20th century. Their work is and has been for establishing unity, cooperation, and brotherhood in all departments of life and in all countries. Here the energy of human desire will be reoriented towards practicing the will to good and establishing right human relations. On the mental plane, he will overshadow and telepathically communicate to all individuals who are working in world affairs. Through these workers, he will have outposts of his consciousness in all nations. It is with the mass of people in every land from the grassroots level that the salvation of the world lies, and with them the preparatory work is already or has been underway. In order for the plan to unfold and for the reappearance of the Christ to happen, the hearts and minds of everyday person must have a certain amount of spiritual development to understand and comprehend the intelligence of the plan. It should be understood that the Christ return is not predicated on him performing miracles or being a savior. He will be a guide for humanity to make its own decisions. It is humanity that must become its own savior by implementing its own acts of humanitarianism, altruism, and demands for honesty, truthfulness, and accountability in governments and all facets of civilization. Further, it's a matter for the service workers to help humanity in coordinating and engaging man's intelligence and free will to enact change. The Tibetan master DK tells us that certain conditions must be taken in the fields of religion and politics to improve right human relations in the world. The Tibetan indicated the following must take place prior to the Christ's reappearance. For one is the principle of sharing must be enacted globally. There must be a redistribution of the wealth of individuals, groups, and resources of nations for the benefit of all humanity. This will result in a reorganization of the global economic system. There must be a cessation of war, or at least a measure of a lasting peace. Conflicts around the world, such as between North Korea and South Korea, ongoing Syrian civil war, the war of Israel with its neighbors, the war in Ukraine, and radical religious elements in the Middle East and Africa and tensions in Asia must be resolved. In addition to the global arms trade and illegal sale of weaponry sold on the black market, these must also be brought under control. There must be a major reorganization of the major religions. For example, this will require the addressing of scandals in many of the Christian churches. Islam must take responsibility and rein in radical elements that are abusing women and perpetrating hatred and violence in numerous parts of the world. This concludes the first of two parts of this podcast on the religious workers.